Yeah, hello, welcome to the 132nd AirHacks TV. Today we have three great questions already in the browser, not in the chat, in the gist, and I would like to start right away with the questions. So the first one is from Mr. Sarkaria, I hope it's pronounced perfectly, and the question is, I have a number of Java EE apps that I want to convert to Quarkus, which is good but not necessary. But with Quarkus, you will save some memory. And if you are on premise in one project, one of my clients saved, I would say we discussed this on the podcast, roughly 50%. Dealing with EJBs and GSF has been easy. This is also my experience. This is actually Java EE apps are simple or more or less straightforward to migrate, but GSF could be hard, but EJBs are not an issue. Zakaria, Zach, okay, perfect. The challenge is now how to deal with MDBs and two-phase commit. So now, message-driven beans and two-phase commit were always a challenge. So message-driven beans with two-phase commit, I remember it was at the airhacks at the airport. There were actually people from the stock exchange, participants, and we had a problem with MQ series message-driven beans and database. And the problem was, as I remember, it was a long time ago, but there were two databases, and the message-driven beans, the topic on the queue was persistent in one database, and we had to write to another one. And the trick was to write both to the same database, so the two-phase commit was no more necessary. But now, how to migrate two-phase commit to the new world? Let's say. And I'm assuming message-driven beans. So what you have to do is to write to a queue, and at the same time to a database, or a message-driven beans. I guess read from a message from the queue and do something different. So usually, writing would be the problem. If you write to a JDBC to a database, and then to a JMS at the same time. Nonetheless. The most, I would say, simple and elegant solution is change data capture like Debezium. What you could do is you can write to a database, then in the same transaction you will receive an event, and with that event you could write something to Kafka, and then you're basically done, because then you can receive as often as you like from Kafka, for instance. The minimal amount of rewriting or architecting. Okay. If you, this is the next sentence is the most important one. With the minimal amount of rewriting and architecting, you can just migrate and message-driven beans to JMS listener, no difference. And you could use, for instance, you could use the commit on JMS level. As I remember, there was JMS context. I think there was a method commit or something. So there is a way to commit the transactions directly. Or if this is hooked to Quarkus, the JMS, then you can of course use the normal JTA transactions. But I believe that usually the MQ series in Quarkus, or I guess it is going to be MQ series or JMS, is not transactional. So you will have to write and stop transactions manually. But you're asking about two-phase commit. So there is a trick. If you have a database driver, which is two-phase commit enabled, or it is capable of two-phase commit, you can have one resource, which could be JMS, which is not two-phase commit enabled. And there was a setting in two-phase commit protocol, and the setting is called emulate two-phase commit. And what happens then is the protocol runs with JDBC like begin, then began, prepare for commit, and then commit. And in the very last phase, the resource, in your case, is JMS, gets committed. Okay. This would be my recommendation. And I integrated once MQ series manually with Quarkus, and it was not a problem at all. Now, Mr. Altuga asked me, I hope now it's absolutely clear. Okay. We are running an on-premise OpenShift cluster, which is a very good idea because OpenShift is a convenient way to run Kubernetes on-premise. And with our application deployed across 5 pods, which is already interesting. I remember in one project we had to use an uneven amount of cluster nodes, so maybe something related. Usually you will add 4 or 6 or 2. My ideal scenario is when a pod crashes, I would like to automatically capture a 5-minute Java flight recording JFR and store it in a remote directory. So, and now what you're asking later is, what are the best practices of effectively using Java flight recording in this setup? So in this setup, I would like to run, or I would run Java flight recording all the time. So JFR was set up for production. You can run it all the time. And this is actually the major advantage of on-premise over in the cloud, because you can do whatever you like usually. And running JFR all the time is a best practice. And what I even use, I would use custom events. So with a custom event, you could create your own business events and emit them when something happens. And there is a JFR observability tool for OpenShift. I forgot the name. OpenShift observability. It's a cool name. Cryo or something. Observability JFR. Something with cryo. CryoStat. So it is open source. So I would. I thought it was K. So good that we look it up. So this CryoStat, what it does is it has a nice visualization tool where you will see the pods emitting JFR events, and so on. This is you have to check it out. So it is the integration OpenShift with Java Flight Recorder, and I would say this is the major advantage of running on-premise architectures over public clouds, because you can do such a thing, right? In public cloud, I would rely more or manage services, but on premise, just go ahead and use that. So I hope you are satisfied with the answer. So run all the time, check out CryoStat, and give feedback next month. So Mr. Zakaria is on fire, so Zach on fire, and ask another question. What do you think about deploying Quarkus binary executable as a custom runtime for AWS Lambda? I tried that. It works great, but I don't do this. So now the question is, why not, right? So why not? Because if I run Lambda, I would like to have as many advantages of serverless as possible. And one advantage is that AWS patches the Corretto for me. So I don't have to care about that. So, but if I would run Quarkus binary executable on AWS, I'm in charge of the entire executable. I will have to build the image and ship it on every occasion. So on every release, on every patch from GraalVM. And by the way, if you are doing this and you on AWS, it doesn't matter, but there is GraalVM or Mandrel, and you have to decide which one to pick. And would that be a better approach than deploying its container image? So the container image is just packaging format. So what I'm doing what Quarkus does. I'm just zipping the classes and pushing to the cloud. So this is what I'm doing. So this is the simplest possible solution. And by the way, if you go to my GitHub, maybe this one, almost this one, if you check out this thing here, so what I'm doing here, I'm using Quarkus, which creates function zip, and deployment happens automatically to AWS with that. Okay. So container image. Also, in your recent Quarkus Insights appearance, thank you for that. And by the way, I wanted to mention this. This was actually nice. And where is it? So there was one. I was actually invited to Red Hat's or Quarkus Insights episode. It's a kind of a podcast, a visual one. And there was a Holly and a Max and Dimitri. I actually forgot his first name because his, Dandriadis was his, label, and I forgot Dimitri's first name during the live stream. And but there was planned for 1 hour, and I spent 1 hour 40, I think, or 50, talking with the host, which was great. And I wanted actually to apologize because I constantly interrupted them because I wanted to show that much that there was not enough time. So, but maybe the entire history. So there was a JFocus. So I already mentioned this at the airhacks TV and at the JFocus conference. What I did, this was actually a freestyle conversation about real-world lean Java, and I got lots of questions in the comments. The system tests would be interesting, and 2024 last event maybe of the year was Java User Group Vienna, and I was supposed to deliver a talk about system testing, but there was not enough time because I spent 3 hours about LLMs. So. And it was also postponed. So I try to fix the situation somehow in the Quarkus Insights, but at least maybe a little bit. I try to talk about how I system test, but it was also not enough time. So and the next event, I try to submit a session just about system testing about that. But back to the live stream, into the question. So what Zakaria asked me, in your recent Quarkus Insight appearance, you said something about using Lambda to offload work from your Kubernetes locally hosted Quarkus service during peak demand. Can you elaborate on that? This would be possible, but what I actually meant is the following. So there is a trick. In the cloud, you have application load balancer. And the ALB, application load balancer, can talk to Fargate. This is like container service or Kubernetes, but Fargate is like the pragmatic solution. And you could run Quarkus on Fargate pod, let's say. So now it's interesting. So what you could also do, behind the same application load balancer, behind the same URI, you can configure a Lambda, and the Lambda will also receive HTTP events. So what it means is you can have Fargate and Lambda behind the same load balancer. So now you can have two different routes, and from the outside world, it is absolutely transparent whether you are talking to application load balancer or to the Lambda. This is what I meant. But you are right. What you could also do is you can have an application load balancer in the cloud, then use private link on premise, and you can run, in theory, your Quarkus on your local Docker image. I never tried that, but it should work, and you can have Lambda in the cloud. So from theoretical from network perspective, it should work. I don't see any problem, because the application load balancer can reroute HTTP traffic to another targets. Then could be IP target, and the IP target could be on premise. Okay, so this is I hope crystal clear right now what I meant. And okay, and now elaborate means usually the cheapest way to run is function URL. You can hide the function URL behind CloudFront. This could work. You can have a Lambda behind HTTP API gateway, which is I think the most popular solution, because behind HTTP API gateway you get a nice URI and URL and domain. Function URL looks ugly, and HTTP API gateway looks good. You can have a proper domain name. And the only problem is under heavy load, the HTTP API gateway becomes expensive. And on the heavy load, application load balancer is way cheaper. But if there is no load, you have still to pay for application load balancer and for the VPC. Okay, so today the chat is lazy, so there are no questions left. So what I will do is I have still to talk about the 100 episodes back, and this is 9 years ago. But if you look at me, I didn't look very fresh. I mean, now I look better than 9 years ago. It seems like I was completely damaged. I don't know what I did. Maybe there was a fight with some architects or whatever, but I didn't look good. So now I look way better, right? So now what we covered back then is the following. So I had here, this is the old 9 years old questions. And the 32nd airhacks TV. So there was a question about monolithic Java EE. And I still believe in monolithic Java EE, in monolithic Quarkus, whatever. I think it's a good idea to create well-structured applications and deploy them at once. I mean, why not? Then UI servlet JSPs versus EJB and CDI authentication. This is interesting one. So I forgot what the question was. But what we would do today is not that different, right? So we would have, maybe what's different is back then OpenID Connect or OAuth were not that popular. But I remember, I think this was a Java one at the beginning. It was still Sans Java one. And the very first day there was Community Day. There were tables, and there was a conversation on a table with Sun engineers, and we had already conversation about OpenID Connect with Sun Identity Server and Glassfish Identity Manager, which is right now ForgeRock. And history, right? So back then I could also answer OAuth, could be interesting. But back then was OAuth 1, which was problematic, and OAuth 2 is popular. But right now, what you will do is usually you will get a token, and the token would be decoded usually in JAX-RS layer, not in the JSP layer. And then you get the roles and the identity, the principal, automatically injectable. Now, this one is interesting. So this one is JDBC versus ORMs. And what I said back then is go with ORMs because they are easier. So I'm pretty sure I said something like this. And today, I would say it depends. Because if you have modern Java, JDK 21 plus and Java records and the nice Java syntax, JDBC can be very efficient. It is not actually given that if you have complex queries or complex inserts, maybe you could be even faster and easier testable with JDBC than, let's say, with JPA. So today, JDBC versus JPA, I would say, depends. If you have CRUD applications, then JPA is faster. The more complex the SQL statements are, you get, then the more appealing JDBC is. But in the cloud, I don't use JDBC nor ORM. So what I'm using in the cloud is a proprietary APIs like S3, for instance, is almost a standard, or DynamoDB, which is basically HTTP. So implementing a web service on a JVM versus on an application server. So okay, I would always use Quarkus for that. Why you should implement, build, the work by yourself. But maybe another question is, if you're in the cloud, not everything has to be Quarkus or Micronaut. For instance, I have some Lambdas which are just plain Java classes without anything. So this is plain JVM. And if we have Lambdas which receive HTTP events, then it's usually Quarkus. Docker host resolution and staging. So hard to say what the question was about, but the fact is that even today I know clients who run plain Docker and are happy, and not everything has to be Kubernetes. So you can have Docker, and if you have staging in Docker, I would say it's straightforward. You have several hosts, and Kubernetes, it really depends whether you have multiple Kubernetes cluster or one huge Kubernetes with namespaces. So launching Docker images in production. So I think it's still these days very important that if you have Docker images, they inherit from your own operating system and JDK, and you're not just downloading Docker from the internet and hope they are safe. So this is a problem. Multiple server instances versus multiple Docker containers. I would say let's take a look at Quarkus. What you usually have is one Docker image, one Quarkus. And if I just run Quarkus on Docker, I already thought about, Docker image inheritance. This one is interesting. So Solar versus Elasticsearch or OpenSearch, because there was some problems with the licenses from Elasticsearch. And Solar, I would say Elasticsearch is more popular. I still recently saw some Solar projects. They also work great. So it's not like you have, to migrate from Solar to Elasticsearch. The Elasticsearch changed the license back, but there's also OpenSearch, which I think became a cloud native project. And so right now I would rather start with OpenSearch, but Solar is still okay choice, I would say. But in longer term, I think Elasticsearch has won. But nonetheless, both are based on Lucene, and Lucene, you could use Lucene directly, which is always a good idea if you don't need the server and you need some chunk index. Lucene is still, the king of the search, not of the road. Okay. Now, Docker RAM limits versus JVM max heap. So interesting. Back then, there were some problems with Java. Nowadays, Java is aware of the Docker, and it understands the Docker limits. So Java sees the Docker limits and not the host limits. How to learn Java EE and Java? I would say the same answer. Just be pragmatic and start with a pet project and learn on the go and learn modern Java, write simple code. This is the most important thing. Recently, we deleted lots of EJB jars actually in migration projects, so you don't need them anymore. This is a good question because I got a recent question to my shorts, and the question was, what is the difference between gRPC and I think JSON? Or no, the question was you cannot compare gRPC to JSON. It was protobuffers in JSON. But let's compare gRPC and REST. This would be a better question right now. And for me, is gRPC more about remote procedure call and commands, and RESTful is more about nice API, business APIs, and you query the API. So this is a different mindset. So gRPC, I would just like to invoke something, and RESTful is I have a nice API which is invocable. Handling security patches with Docker has something to do with the production. So usually you would like to inherit from your super image. And of course, if there is a problem in the super image, you will have to redeploy all Docker instances automatically. URI info with proxies, this is a good one. What it means is if you are in JFRs, usually the JFRs doesn't see the actual URI. So what happens is if you are in the cloud and you have load balancer or a CloudFront, what happens is the actual host name is in a header and you can pick that. So approaches to secure JFRS services, OpenID Connect. And this is not secure, it's more like authentication and authorization, and to secure is of course TLS. And application firewall is a great way to secure your JFRS services, and something like Cloudflare. I always confuse it with CloudFront. Cloudflare is also a great service for denial of service attacks. Not for denial, to prevent denial of service attacks. Okay, Hardy Burke asked me, hello, for service discovery server, would you recommend Eureka or alternative for it? I never used that, I have to say. I wouldn't suggest anything. So, for instance, I think the trick is, if you can, provide good names. And there's several approaches to it. For instance, currently in my projects in the cloud, what I try to do is, if you have multi-account strategy, we create a nice DNS name per account, which can be derived from the account, let's say the account is airhacks, so the name would be airhacks.com, let's say, right? And then you know that if you have service mail, it would be mail. It would the CNAME mail.airhacks.com, for instance. The discovery, I never understood the problem in business projects because we don't have that many services, right? So if you're Netflix, different story. In my world, in an enterprise, is the question is, what problem we have to solve? So what problem do you have? You cannot find the services, or why you have so many services, and why they are named so strange. So this was my questions, right? In your last talk, you mentioned that you don't use Docker in an enterprise. I mean, my clients use usually Kubernetes, and some smaller clients use Docker, but the majority of projects use Kubernetes on-premise. And what I maybe said is, Hadi, is that on-premise, I'm using usually my clients. I'm using OpenShift. is very common on premise. It's a Kubernetes distribution, or Rancher, for instance. And in the cloud, we don't need Kubernetes because the cloud is our Kubernetes. I mean, there are several hundred services. So if I'm going to the cloud, I will like to use it. And on that note, there is an upcoming Java user group meeting for Riyadh. And I will talk about that, about serverless and clouds, and maybe for sure with some code. Okay, now Alchuk, I think unit tests are not functional. How we can verify business correctness in a CI/CD pipeline? A very good point. This is like a softball to me because this is actually my words, my words. In CI/CD pipeline, what happens is we try to deploy our application as soon as possible in production-like environment. We get the URI back, and then we have another module. Actually, I presented this at the Quarkus Insights talk. Quarkus Insights talk. This one. So I did it live, and what I did, I deployed hello service and then hello service test, and the hello ST called the first service, and exactly this we do in the pipeline. So we have code pipeline with 2 stages, code build, and the second one invokes the first one. If you have Jenkins, you have several steps, no difference. So Zach asked me, in Quarkus, which situation do you normally use reactive mutiny over the imperative approach? So I never used mutiny in Quarkus, and even in code reviews, we ported back mutiny to just plain Java code, because with mutiny, you can have several thousand transactions per second, which we never have in enterprise. So this is at most a few thousand transactions per second, and mutiny is not a solution to such a problem. But if I would build, let's say, a load balancer, I will use mutiny, but usually I'm not building load balancers. Long-term support, ask me, LTS. Or maybe LTS is long-term support. LTS is long-term support. You have used a lot of AWS. Yeah, also Azure, but right now it's AWS. If your client asks you to migrate to another cloud provider, it will be easy for you as AWS oblige you to use their libraries in your projects. We don't have any libraries, AWS libraries in my projects. Let's say, if you go, for instance, to where was it? Here. If you take a look at this, so the CDK is Cloud Development Kit, is the infrastructure. And this is the Lambda. And if you take a look at the libraries, there are optional libraries. For instance, what I prepared, I'm assuming, if you would like to pick something from configuration, here are the libraries. But other than that, there is not a single library. And this is not a library, this is just an extension. So, for instance, this project would run completely on Azure, outside Azure, on bare metal. But of course, if you decide to talk to S3, you need the S3 SDK. But if you go to Azure and you decide to talk to Azure Blob Storage, you will need the Azure Blob Storage API, right? So now what you could do is to say, okay, I don't like to be depending on AWS at all. And then we can say we talk to Postgres. And then even you could use the DSQL on AWS, which is a Dynamo-like database with which is Postgres compatible. And then on Azure, just pick Postgres. But the migration from one provider to another, I would say the Java code is the least problematic part. What usually happens, you will have to migrate your identity, your network, you will have to test the application load balancers. This is the real world, the real work, not migrating my libraries in Java code. So therefore, I think it is better to completely rely on AWS or cloud provider on Azure or AWS, completely depend on the provider, but write very simple code and use as many features as possible. And if you have to migrate from AWS to Azure, then or to Oracle Cloud, then you have to map the services. And by the way, there is, let's say, AWS to Azure mapping. So, and there was a table, as I remember. For instance, there is time series DevOps and Internet of Things management, and there will be persistence. For instance, authentication IAM, there's Microsoft Entra ID, and so forth. You can one-to-one map encryption, firewalls, security, web applications. For instance, if there is Fargate, this is Fargate, or ECS, Elastic, Beanstalk. There is an Azure App Service and Elastic Container Service. I'm just it's strange there is not there. Should be Kubernetes or let's see, container. Interestingly, because the app runner is web app from containers, and the Elastic Container Service could be also Azure App Service. They are very similar. And there's storage. Do they have S3? What? Azure for AWS professionals. So maybe there's Azure for there was a table with all the services, and what do you have to do, as I remember, was S3, then it is mapped to Azure Blob Storage. And what you will have to do is you will have to to map the services and then rewrite the code, and you are done. And I think you have two choices. Either you try to completely abstract from the cloud provider and don't use any services. But then my question is, why you not just stay on premise? Because OpenShift on premise is just great. Okay, I think we are done, ladies and gentlemen. Right? So I was late today. Sorry for that. And next time we will be on time, even before the time. And in Google Cloud, you see there are lots of comparisons. Yes, we have simple storage, Azure Blob Storage, and cloud storage, for instance. This will be the mapping. And the cool story is, if you use S3, S3 became the standard. You can even use S3 on premise. So you could actually have Quarkus with AWS Lambda, which is portable across clouds, if you like. But I think it is not about portability; it's about time to migration. So I mean, if you could say, I would like to be completely portable and just run inside a Docker container, and then you spend weeks to be portable. So I think it is not a good idea, because it is really hard, to be portable. Another idea could be I'm completely depending on the cloud, but the migration from one cloud to another takes me 2 weeks. also an approach, right? Okay. Now, other news. At the last AirHacks Live workshop, I got a lots of requests about the Eventbrite. So the Eventbrite service, now they are all the courses available. This is GenAI and the hardcore serverless Java. Both are available from Eventbrite as well. And you can also pay per invoice if you like. Apple Pay, everything works. And they're also available on Meetup, of course. And I also wanted to thank you because there are way over 1,000 members on the Meetup platform, which is very good. Thank you. And what I also would like to thank you is the stars. There's like 255 stars I got. There should be somewhere visible here. And I always wanted to say thank you. But yeah, I would say thank you a lot. No questions? Then thank you a lot and see you at upcoming conferences. RIA Java User Group. And and in spring, April, right? First Monday of the month, usually 8 p.m., sometimes later. Thank you a lot and see you next time. Bye.